The universe screamed, then went silent. Captain Eva Rostova was thrown from her command chair, the safety harness snapping like a rotten thread. Alarms blared a deafening chorus before being abruptly cut off. The survey ship Wanderer hit the uncharted planet Xylos not with a crash, but with a series of tearing, shrieking impacts that shredded metal and hope alike. When Eva finally regained consciousness, her head was throbbing, and the taste of blood and ozone filled her mouth. She was tangled in wreckage, the emergency lights casting a hellish red glow over the chaos of the bridge. One look told her everything. The Wanderer was dead. Slowly, painfully, she extricated herself. Outside the buckled viewport, instead of the familiar black of space, was a riot of alien green. Towering trees with iridescent leaves pressed in, their branches like grasping claws. The air that seeped through a crack in the hull was thick, humid, and alive with 1,000 strange smells. A groan nearby, Jax, the ship's xenobiologist and oldest crew member, was stirring. "Captain," he rasped, clutching his side. "Here, Jax," Eva said, her voice hoarse. "Status." Jax coughed. "Bad, very bad." They found Lena, the young engineer, trapped beneath a fallen console, terrified but miraculously unharmed. Together, they managed to free her. Of the Wanderer's crew of 12, only 5 made it out of the main wreckage alive. Comms were a twisted ruin. Medical supplies were scattered and mostly destroyed. A few dented emergency ration packs were all they had for food. They stumbled out of the gash in the ship's side into the alien jungle. It was breathtakingly beautiful, a vibrant, pulsating world of impossible colors and strange, elegant flora. But there was a menace in its beauty, a watchfulness in the silent trees. "We need to find shelter, take stock," Eva said, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "Anyone see the emergency beacon?" No one had. They were gathered at the edge of the crash site, a small, traumatized huddle, when young Ensign Miller, barely an adult, pointed. "Look, something moved over there, by those purple ferns." Before anyone could react, a blur of motion exploded from the ferns. It was six-limbed, sleek, and impossibly fast, a nightmare of corded muscle, razor-sharp claws, and a gaping maw filled with needle-like teeth. Jax would later dub them Stalkers. It moved with terrifying speed, a red-brown streak against the green. Miller screamed, a short, choked sound, as the creature pounced. It was over in seconds. The stalker was a whirlwind of savage power, and then it was gone, melting back into the jungle as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only a spreading crimson stain on the alien soil and the horrified silence of the survivors. Eva felt a cold dread grip her heart. Jax stared, his face pale, his scientific curiosity momentarily overwhelmed by raw horror. Lena was openly weeping, her hands clapped over her mouth. Eva fumbled for an emergency flare, her hands shaking. She ignited it, the harsh red light cutting through the dimming jungle. "Back to the wreckage," she yelled, her voice cracking. "Everyone now." They scrambled back into the relative safety of the broken ship, the image of the stalker's brutal efficiency burned into their minds. Xylos was not just an uncharted world, it was a death trap, and they were the prey. The first night on Xylos was a sleepless torment. The 5 survivors huddled together in the most intact section of the Wanderer's ruined hull, the single emergency flare they kept burning casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on their frayed nerves. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves in the alien jungle outside, sounded like the approach of another stalker. The memory of Ensign Miller's horrific death was a fresh, gaping wound. By the dim light of dawn filtering through cracks in the wreckage, Captain Rostova tried to organize them. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice hoarse but firm. "This wreck is a beacon for those things. We need a more defensible position, and we need to find that long-range emergency transmitter. It's our only hope." They salvaged what little they could. A few more ration bars, a first aid kit with dwindling supplies, and a couple of hydro spanners that might serve as crude clubs. The jungle pressed in on all sides, a wall of vibrant, indifferent green. The air was thick with the buzzing of unseen insects and the distant calls of unknown creatures. They hadn't moved more than 50 meters from the crash site, scouting for a small, defensible clearing when it happened again. This time, there were two of them. Two red-brown blurs erupting from the undergrowth, their chilling, guttural hisses echoing through the trees. "Run!" Eva screamed, shoving Lena forward. It was a desperate scramble. They fled back towards the tangled metal of the Wanderer, the stalkers unbelievably fast on their heels. Jax, despite his age, moved with surprising agility, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and an almost detached, scientific focus. He'd always been an observer. One stalker, slightly larger than the other, focused on him. Jax dodged behind a broad-trunked, violet-barked tree, the creature's claws tearing at the space where he'd been a split second before. He pushed himself, his lungs burning, and sprinted for another patch of cover. The stalker bounded after him, a terrifying engine of muscle and teeth. But then, as Jax risked a glance back, he saw it. After a furious sprint of perhaps 40 or 50 seconds, the pursuing stalker visibly slowed. Its powerful chest, or what passed for a chest on its alien frame, was heaving. Strange, gill-like vents along its flanks, which Jax hadn't noticed before in the panic, flared wide with each breath, pulsing rhythmically. The creature let out a frustrated hiss and actually stumbled, its 6 limbs momentarily uncoordinated. It broke off the chase, retreating a few steps to glare at him, panting heavily. The other stalker, having cornered another survivor, Ortega, near the wreckage, was similarly driven off by a well-aimed, sparking flare from Eva. Both creatures melted back into the jungle, but not before Jax got another good look at the larger one, still breathing hard, its vents working like bellows. Once their hearts stopped pounding in their chests, Jax gathered the others. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice breathless. "The big one," it tired, quickly. Ortega, still shaking, scoffed. "Tired. It almost took my head off. Those things are lightning." "Yes, in a sprint," Jax insisted. "But I think their stamina is poor, very poor. Like a cheetah, maybe. All explosive speed, but no endurance." Eva looked at him, her brow furrowed. "You're sure, Jax?" "I saw it. It was winded. Those vents on its sides, they were working overtime. I think it overheats, or its muscles can't sustain that kind of output for long." Lena, the engineer, who had been staring at her trembling hands, looked up. "It's possible," she said softly. "On Earth, some predators have mostly fast-twitch muscle fibers for explosive bursts. They rely on anaerobic respiration, which builds up lactic acid quickly. They can't sustain it." Most of the survivors looked unconvinced, the terror of the stalker's speed too fresh in their minds. But Eva saw a flicker of something in Jax's eyes, a desperate hope backed by observation. "We need to rest," Eva said. "And then, Jax, you tell me more about this theory." Another night descended, filled with the chilling sounds of the alien jungle and the unspoken fear that the stalkers would return. Food was strictly rationed. Water was becoming a serious concern. Their survival depended on finding an edge, any edge, against the red death that stalked them. The next morning, under the oppressive humidity of Xylos, Jax laid out his desperate theory. "They're ambush predators," he explained, his voice low and earnest. "They rely on overwhelming speed and surprise. If we can deny them that initial quick kill, if we can force them into a prolonged chase, even a series of short ones, I believe we can exhaust them." Captain Rostova listened intently, her gaze sweeping over her small, battered group. Ortega still looked skeptical, his face pale. Lena, however, was nodding slowly, her engineer's mind connecting Jax's observations with biological principles. The fifth survivor, a quiet security officer named Corbin, just watched, his expression unreadable. "It's a huge risk, Jax," Eva said finally. "If you're wrong." "If I'm wrong, we die anyway, Captain," Jax replied grimly. "They'll pick us off one by one if we just huddle here or try to fight them head-on. We don't have the firepower, but we might have something else. Endurance. Humans are built for it." He proposed a dangerous experiment. They needed to confirm his theory to see a stalker pushed past its limits under more controlled conditions. "We need a lure," he said, "and a relatively open area, something with scattered cover so we can observe, but not so dense they can ambush us easily from anywhere." They found a small clearing a short distance from the wreckage, dotted with those strange, violet-barked trees and thick clumps of luminescent fungi. For a lure, they used the last of a nutrient paste packet, its strong, sweet scent wafting into the jungle. Jax, despite his age, was still the fittest and most agile among them. He volunteered to be the bait. "I'll run a specific pattern," he explained, drawing in the dirt with a stick. "A series of zigzags and short dashes between these trees. The goal isn't to outrun it completely, but to make it work, to force it into multiple bursts of speed, to keep it from getting a clean shot." He indicated a dense thicket of thorny vines on the far side of the clearing. "That's my escape route, if things go truly bad." Eva positioned Lena and Corbin, armed with the last two precious flares, behind a fallen log, their job to create a distraction if Jax was overwhelmed. She herself would observe from a slightly elevated position on a moss-covered rock, her hydrospanner clutched tightly. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was either brilliant or suicidal. They didn't have to wait long. A low hiss, and then a stalker, sleeker and darker red than the ones they'd seen before, burst from the jungle edge, drawn by the scent of the paste, its yellow eyes fixed on Jax. With a shout, Jax took off, sprinting towards the first violet tree. The stalker exploded after him, a blur of deadly motion. Jax ducked, weaved, his movements surprisingly nimble. He pushed off the trunk of one tree, angled towards another, forcing the stalker to adjust, to expend energy in short, furious bursts. The creature's claws tore bark from trees, missing him by inches. Its hisses were sharp, frustrated. Round and round the small clearing they went, a deadly dance. Jax's lungs burned, sweat poured down his face, but he stuck to the plan, forcing the stalker to follow his erratic path. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than 2 minutes, the stalker's movements began to change. Its incredible speed started to falter. Its dashes became shorter, its recovery time longer. Once it stumbled, its 6 legs tangling for a split second. The gill-like vents on its flanks were flared wide, pulsing like overworked bellows. A thin, vaporous mist seemed to rise from its skin. Finally, with a guttural snarl that sounded more like frustration than aggression, the stalker abandoned the chase. It skidded to a halt, its chest heaving, and retreated a short distance to glare at Jax. It was panting heavily, its whole body trembling slightly. Jax leaned against a tree, gasping for breath, drenched in sweat, but a triumphant grin spread across his face. He looked at Eva, who stared back, a mixture of disbelief and dawning hope in her eyes. "It worked," Jax panted, wiping his brow. "It bloody well worked. It can't keep it up. It overheats or just runs out of gas. We can beat them." The stalker, after a few moments of heavy breathing, let out one last frustrated hiss and slunk back into the deep jungle, leaving the clearing to the stunned but suddenly hopeful humans. The success of Jax's dangerous experiment sent a ripple of cautious optimism through the weary survivors. It wasn't a guarantee of safety, but it was a lifeline, a strategy in a place that had seemed intent on offering them none. "So we become persistence hunters," Eva said, the term sounding strange even to her own ears. "Or rather, persistence evaders." Jax nodded, still catching his breath. "Exactly. We can't outrun them in a sprint, clearly, but we are built for endurance. Our bipedalism is incredibly energy efficient over long distances. We sweat to cool ourselves, something that Stalker clearly wasn't doing very effectively. If we can force them into a sustained effort, we can wear them down." Their immediate goal was still the Wanderer's long-range emergency beacon. Lena, after studying the salvaged schematics on her datapad, miraculously still functional, if low on power, confirmed it was located in the ship's tail section. The problem was, the Wanderer had broken apart during its crash. The tail section, according to the ship's internal telemetry logs she managed to access, had sheared off and crashed several kilometers deeper into the jungle, somewhere towards a distant, mist-shrouded mountain range they could just glimpse through the canopy. It meant a trek, a long, dangerous walk through stalker territory. "We move at a steady pace," Jax instructed as they prepared to leave the relative, if temporary, safety of the main crash site. "No panic. No sudden sprints unless absolutely necessary, and then only for short distances to break their charge. We stick together. We make them work for every meter." Their first day of travel was a grueling test of their new theory and their own physical and mental limits. They moved in a tight group, Eva at the point, Jax bringing up the rear, Lena, Corbin, and Ortega in the middle. The jungle was an obstacle course of tangled roots, thick vines, and boggy patches. The humidity was relentless, sapping their strength. It wasn't long before they picked up shadows. Two stalkers, their red-brown hides blending almost perfectly with the rust-colored undergrowth, began to flank them, their yellow eyes watching. The first charge came without warning, a blur from the left, aimed at Ortega. "Hold," Eva yelled. "Short burst to the right, now." They put on a controlled burst of speed for perhaps 30 meters, angling away from the attack, then immediately slowed back to their steady, energy-efficient walking pace. The stalker, having missed its initial lunge, skidded to a halt, hissed, and retreated to shadow them again. It became a pattern. Every 20 or 30 minutes, one of the stalkers would try a rush. Each time, the humans would respond with a short, tactical sprint, changing direction, using trees for momentary cover, then resuming their determined walk. Eva directed them, her voice calm and authoritative despite the terror that clawed at her. Jax shouted encouragement, reminded them to breathe, to maintain their pace. "Don't let them dictate the terms," he'd call out. "We make them react to us." It was exhausting. Muscles screamed. Lungs ached. Every nerve was stretched taut. The stalkers were relentless, their frustration growing with each failed attack. Their hisses became more frequent, more agitated. The humans could see them panting, the vents on their sides flaring, even after relatively short pursuits. By late afternoon, when the strange twin sons of Xylos began to dip towards the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows through the jungle, the humans were near collapse. They were caked in mud and sweat, their clothes torn, their faces grim with fatigue. But they were alive, and the stalkers, though still trailing them, were visibly flagging. Their charges were less explosive, their movements less certain. One of them even stumbled and fell during a pursuit, recovering slowly. "They're tiring," Lena whispered, her voice hoarse. Jax was right. They're actually getting tired. A small, fierce spark of triumph ignited within Eva. It was working. They were turning their greatest weakness, their relative slowness, into a weapon, fueled by the ancient human legacy of endurance. The second day of their trek was a relentless continuation of the first, a grueling marathon against an enemy designed for sprints. The two stalkers, or perhaps a different pair that had picked up their trail, harried them constantly. But the humans, though pushed to the brink of exhaustion, held to their strategy. Steady pace, short defensive bursts, conserve energy, make the predators work. Lena, navigating by the Wanderer's schematics on her flickering datapad, announced they were nearing a ridge of rocky outcrops. "The secondary crash site, where the tail section should be, is just beyond that ridge," she said, her voice raspy with dehydration and fatigue. "If we can reach those rocks, we'll have a more defensible position for the night, and to search for the beacon." Hope surged through the small group, lending a new, if temporary, strength to their aching limbs. But one of the stalkers, a particularly large and aggressive individual with a prominent scar across its snout, possibly a pack alpha, Jack surmised, seemed to sense their destination. It refused to give up. It had been shadowing them for hours, its attacks growing more desperate, its frustration almost palpable. As they began the slight ascent towards the rocky ridge, Lena, her vision blurred by sweat and exhaustion, stumbled on a loose rock. She cried out, falling heavily, her datapad skittering away. The scarred stalker saw its chance. It had been waiting for a moment of weakness, a separation. With a guttural roar that was more frustration than hunting cry, it launched itself from the undergrowth, a red-brown missile aimed directly at the fallen engineer. Lena screamed, scrambling backward, but she was too slow, too tired. This time, something snapped in Eva. Days of fear, of running, of watching her crew suffer, coalesced into a single, defiant spark. "No!" she yelled. Instead of continuing to flee, instead of trying another short sprint, she spun around, her crude hydrospanner held high, and charged towards the oncoming stalker. Jax, reacting instantly to Eva's raw courage, let out a hoarse battle cry and charged with her, waving his own makeshift weapon. "Get up, Lena," he bellowed. Corbin and Ortega, stunned for a bare second by their leader's suicidal audacity, caught the infectious wave of defiance. They too turned, shouting, brandishing their pathetic weapons, making themselves appear as large and as threatening as their exhausted bodies would allow. The HFY payoff. The scarred stalker, already pushed far beyond its natural endurance limits by the relentless day-long game of chase and retreat, skidded to an abrupt halt barely meters from Lena. Its yellow eyes, usually burning with predatory focus, now held a flicker of something else. Confusion, bewilderment. This was not how prey behaved. Prey ran, prey cowered. Prey did not turn and charge, screaming defiance. Its massive chest heaved, the gill-like vents on its sides flaring in ragged, desperate gasps. It made a half-hearted, snapping lunge in their direction, a movement that lacked its earlier terrifying conviction. Then, with a visible tremor running through its powerful limbs, the stalker wobbled. Its legs buckled. It collapsed onto the jungle floor with a heavy thud, panting, its sides heaving. It tried to push itself up, let out a weak, defeated hiss, and then lay still, utterly spent. Defeated not by superior firepower, not by claws or teeth, but by the shocking, unexpected audacity of its prey and the crushing weight of its own exhausted biology. The humans, equally exhausted but miraculously alive, stood panting over the fallen predator for a long, silent moment. A grim, primal understanding passed between them. They had faced death, and through sheer, stubborn persistence, they had won. Lena scrambled to her feet, retrieving her datapad. The other stalker, which had been watching from the jungle edge, let out a low, uncertain whine. It looked at its fallen pack leader, then at the five small, upright, incredibly noisy bipeds, and seemed to make a decision. It turned and melted back into the green depths, leaving them alone. They reached the rocky outcrop as the twin suns began to set. The secondary wreckage of the Wanderer's tail section was visible in a small ravine below. The path to potential rescue was still fraught with peril, but they now possessed a powerful, ancient weapon, one forged in the crucible of human evolution. Their own indomitable endurance and the stubborn refusal to simply lie down and die.